stand up against the Commission in order to ensure that we get a good deal? Of course he won't, because he won't even stand up for his own members of Parliament. Why is it that a Labour Member of Parliament needs armed protection at her own party conference? Why is it that nearly half of female Labour MPs wrote to the Leader of the Opposition to say that he was not standing up against the vilification and the abuse that they received online, which was being carried out in his name? If he cannot protect his own Members of Parliament, if he cannot protect the proud traditions of the Labour Party, how can he possibly protect this country? We cannot have confidence in him to lead. We have confidence in this government, which is why I commend this motion.
Order! Under the order of the House!
Good evening, this is us at Broadcasting Scotland and this is News at 7. We're here with Chris McCusker and we're going to try and make sense for you out of this Brexit vote of no confidence disaster that is going on in Westminster just now. Good evening to you.
How are we? Thank you for inviting me along.
So how do you expect it's going to go down tonight?
Unfortunately, they're going to win. It seems bizarre to say that, but it's a foregone conclusion that the 200 votes against the government last night basically aren't worth the ballot that it was in.
Let's have a look how that goes. Okay, that's them on their way out. So it looks like everybody's leaving the room now to head into the halls.
Yeah, this is the age-old tradition where the Speaker calls for the lobby to be cleared for some bizarre reason. Then they go into two dividing lobbies, one for the no vote, one for the yes vote, which is where you get your tellers for the no's and tellers for the ayes. Basically everybody trips through.
Look, that's Theresa May on her way out.
Unfortunately not her way out permanently.
We'll see about that. We'll see how permanent this move is, but we can all probably expect that it's not going to be as permanent as we would like.
Well, no, it's not. And even in the next couple of days, the opposition can table another vote of no confidence, but is there any mileage in it?
Well, and it's very heavily dependent on where we're going with this. It's 10 weeks left on Friday.
Exactly, 10 weeks left, and you would be fighting a general election with the backdrop of the fact that we would be falling out the EU through the back door. And the only thing sensible to do, which the Prime Minister has dismissed out of hand, would be to invoke revoke Article 50 and basically extend the period that they could possibly change their stance on Brexit. But it was interesting earlier on today. I heard one Tory MP saying that the Tory party won't change any of their red lines to suit the EU. Well, but the EU won't change their red lines either.
No,
do you know what I mean? And which is another thing altogether, because we still don't know what Jeremy Corbyn's position is. I don't even think Jeremy Corbyn knows what his position is, probably in a shed at the back of a garden. He's a bit of an enigma for me, which is strange because I had high hopes for Corbyn when he came into when he became Prime Minister, the leader of the
opposition,
Labour Party in the UK. which is pointing out to say that he's the leader of the Labour Party of the UK. As in, you know, what's the point in Richard Leonard? But that's a whole different ballgame. Being obviously from a socialist background, I thought, oh, this is really good. This, you know, because the last time that the Labour Party had a socialist leader was John Smith back in the early 90s, and unfortunately he was not to be the Prime Minister. But the issue on Europe really trips Corbyn up, and
well, and by extension, the entire country, right? There's an opportunity here to be in true opposition, to actually present a case for European membership, but also if you don't, at least have a positive case for the country. And instead, he's just completely voiding any sort of proper expression on anything.
Well, exactly, because he's hung himself out to dry too many times, because he's often referred to the EU as an elite boys' club, and he's sort of like portrayed himself as the quintessential socialist, snarling against the corporateness of the EU. And it was very, very scathing when Greece were going through their troubles and stuff like that, and blamed everything at the EU's door. But you know, I've often felt that you know, you have to be in it in order to change it.
Absolutely, and I think that is well, we've tried the same approach with the Union, with the UK Union.
Well, yeah.
And we have tried that, but I can really see a difference between the EU at least attempting to make some changes and to start moving towards a more progressive, more inclusive, coherent system. Yeah. And we don't see any of that in Westminster. I mean, you know, yeah. Especially with, we're seeing them returning now. Well, but this sort of system, as a voting system, to prefer this to a system that is digital, or to a system that is representative of the member states, where the votes are distributed properly, it's... Well,
again, that's another interesting point, and Ian Blackford made it earlier on today, is the fact that the Scottish Parliament has a system of proportional representation, which is, you know, like far more democratic than you know, this archaic system where you've got people whispering in the many bars within the House of Parliament and stuff like that. You know, and
I mean, the whole difference between, you know, having an actual parliament and having a House of Commons and then a House of Lords, when we know that the only even less representative and unelected chamber is, I believe, the one in China.
Yep.
You know, it's just not a proper argument to make, but it's an opportunity missed for the Labour Party. It's an opportunity missed for the entire country, where there is an argument that could have been made, and we'll go to some international European quotes about the context that we're in a minute, but to see how this is being sold and not approached properly in terms of the EU, that there has been absolutely no case made for the EU in the last 3 years.
Yeah, well, you see, I mean, this is something where, you know, I mean, I am ex-Labour, you know, and I just find it repugnant that they maybe do 4 years, or maybe they serve 8 years or 10 years, whatever, MPs, and their golden goal is the red and white ermine that will elevate them into the House of Lords, where they can get paid £300 a day just to basically turn up.
Yeah.
And it doesn't do anything. It is basically a big boys' club, although there are women in it. You know, one notably, Michelle Mone. But yeah, it's just basically a slap on the back for people saying, well done, your services has been rewarded, now you can sit in this unelected House of Lords and you know, get paid oodles amount of money on top of you know, obviously your...
Yes. It couldn't be further.
Wealth. Exactly.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and again, this is where Corbyn slips up for me time and time again. As a self-confessed socialist, you know, he actually wants to be a part of the establishment that actually gives life to this horrible, repugnant room of grandeur and dripping in gold and red and pomp and ceremony, and
Absolutely.
that is the complete polar opposite of what a socialist stands for.
Yes.
And yet you know that is what they chase. So if anybody turns around to me and says, well, you know, the Labour Party are a socialist party, they were born a socialist party by Keir Hardie, and I maybe need to spell that for some of the Labour supporters because they tend to get it wrong and get it confused with Oliver Hardie. He advocated against the establishment. He also advocated for home rule for Scotland. He hated Westminster with a vengeance, and yet these people don't actually live up to his own expectations.
Absolutely. Look, we're starting to get back.
Yeah.
Nice and tidy, right back into your purchase. It's going to be interesting. It's going to be interesting because we already pretty much know the outcome of tonight, and that seems to be the same for yesterday and the day before. We all know what is happening, and we know that it's concentrated around.
I'm struggling with the numbers in the Labour benches that would side with the SNP, the Liberal Democrats, and one Green MP, Caroline Lucas, and Plaid. You know, so I think that they're going to lose. It's going to be they're going to lose marginally, I would say. But I would suggest that it would be closer than what we think. But it would be, you know, bear in mind the fact that the government of, you know, they can hand on heart say that they're going to get the votes of the DUP. Do you know what I mean? Because
they only cost 10 billion.
Well, exactly. Do you know what I mean? And that's what, 1 billion for each of them.
Exactly. I mean, yeah, and even if we consider that, even if May were not to stay in office, what is the sensible alternative? The UK doesn't have a sensible alternative. Any other path than keeping her in the office that she is in at the minute just leads down the path of no-deal Brexit.
Well, you see, this is and again, it's the parliamentary arithmetic that sort of that people have to take into consideration here, because even if Corbyn was to say, you know, that he would be prepared to do a deal with the SNP, as opposed to say that the SNP would want to do a deal with Corbyn.
No.
Do you know
I mean,
what I mean?
at least the
Because
SNP has been open to this, right?
Yeah.
But the Labour Party has completely refused. It again highlights the complete dichotomy between claiming you're a socialist and then not allowing the thought of getting out of the union.
Exactly, yeah. Very eloquently just made my argument for me there, thank you.
Okay, so here we're going back in. Let's have a listen. I still can't believe that this is an official democracy that up until the last couple of years has been highly respected around the world, and how far it's fallen.
Yeah. We only need to look at the Scottish Parliament to see how the electronic voting goes there, and it works.
Yeah.
You know, fantastically.
Well, in which way does this not work?
Well, with the exception of the fact that Kedja Dugdale actually pressed the wrong button one afternoon.
Oh, we'll show her. We're supposed to have a good and close look about who's coming back in and what that looks like. But they're all okay.
Again, going back to the debates earlier on today, once Theresa May had pitched her tuppence worth and Jeremy Corbyn had finished it, then goes down to Ian Blackford. and as soon as Ian stood up to speak, half of the chamber emptied.
Yeah.
Do you know, I mean, that shows how much respect that these people have for their politicians. You know, and time again, that is all too familiar, and the Tory MPs forget that this wide-angle camera basically sees all.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? And there are far more people in Scotland that are engaged with this.
Well, it does seem to me that Scotland is watching this, but the Tory voters in Scotland often aren't. They are getting their news from the media, from the mainstream media.
Correct, yeah.
They are not like us, sitting like in front of the television and watching this.
You often meet them at 6 o'clock in the Tesco Metro, when they're buying their bottles of wine and ready meals, along with their Daily Mails and stuff like that, so that they can catch up with the right-wing propaganda that's coming out of London.
Results going to be announced very soon. It's kind of nice that the SNP bench is empty.
Yeah. Here we go.
The ayes to the right, 306. The noes to the left, 325.
The ayes to the right, 306. The noes to the left, 325. So the noes have it. The noes have it. Unlock.
Yeah. I did actually predict that it would be possibly closer than what everybody was thinking.
Point of order, Mr. Speaker. I'm pleased that this House has expressed its confidence in the government. I do not take this responsibility lightly, and my government will continue its work to increase our prosperity, guarantee our security, and to strengthen our union. And yes, we will also continue to work to deliver on the solemn promise we made to the people of this country to deliver on the result of the referendum and leave the European Union. I believe this duty is shared by every member of this House, and we have a responsibility to identify a way forward that can secure the backing of the House. To that end, I've proposed a series of meetings between senior parliamentarians and representatives of the government over the coming days, and I would like to invite the leaders of parliamentary parties to meet with me individually, and I would like to start these meetings tonight. Mr. Speaker, the government approaches these meetings in a constructive spirit, and I urge others to do the same. But we must find solutions that are negotiable and command sufficient support in this House. And, as I've said, we will return to the House on Monday to table an amendable motion and to make a statement about the way forward. The House has put its confidence in this government. I stand ready to work with any member of this House to deliver on Brexit and ensure that this House retains the confidence of the British people.
Point of order, Mr. Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last night the House rejected the government's conclusion of its negotiations with the European...
Order. I called the Prime Minister on a point of order, and the Prime Minister was heard. And she was heard in relative tranquility and certainly with courtesy. And the same courtesy will be extended to the Leader of the Opposition and to others who seek to raise points. That's the way it is. Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last night the House rejected the government's deal, emphatically. A week ago, the House voted to condemn the idea of a no-deal Brexit. Before there can be any positive discussions about the way forward, the government The government must remove clearly, once and for all, the prospect of the catastrophe of a no-deal Brexit from the EU and all the chaos that would come as a result of that. And I invite the Prime Minister to confirm now that the government will not countenance a no-deal Brexit from the European Union.
A point of order, Mr. Ian Blackford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I must say that I welcome the offer of talks from the Prime Minister. I think it's important, Mr. Speaker, that all of us recognise the responsibility that we have, and on the back of the defeat of the government's motion last night, that we have to work together where we can to find a way forward. I commit the Scottish National Party to working constructively with the government. However, I do think it's important. I do think it is important in that regard that we make it clear to the Prime Minister, in the spirit of openness in these talks, that the issue of removing extending Article 50 of a people's vote and avoiding a no deal have to be on the table. We have to agree to enter these talks on the basis that we can move forward and achieve a result which will unify all the nations of the United Kingdom.
Thank you.
It looks like this is all that we're going to get for tonight. What did you make of Ian Blackford's speech there?
Well, as usual, Ian, very, very polite, very, very pragmatic, and clearly, as he has been throughout all this, is basically not a red line, but he's basically sticking to his guns by saying, you know, she has to entertain the possibility of a people's vote, and for that to happen, obviously, there has to be a pause put on Article 50. You know, it doesn't strike me, because I've often known it for as long as I've been in the SNP, but they constantly stick to what they originally put out, whereas with the Labour Party, they're all over the place. Do you know what I mean? 1 minute they're for this, 1 minute they're for that. No, we didn't say this, and no, we didn't say that. And throughout the whole negotiations, even although the fact that we haven't been heard, you know, we've been constantly slapped down, and you know, we've not had proper interaction with the government, although they say, you know, we're constantly talking to people, you know, the Scottish government and the Welsh government and all the rest of it. I find it bizarre for them to constantly dismiss us, but at the same time fail to recognise the fact that we have been consistent in our approach.
You're absolutely right. I think the only consistency that we've seen in Westminster in the last couple of months, but over the last 2 or 3 years, is the one that comes from Scotland, and especially from the SNP. Though, to be fair, there are individuals, and I'm thinking of Caroline Lucas here, who's also been incredibly consistent, but because of the limitations of just being one MP for one party, she's been quite isolated and has been able to find some resonance within the SNP. It is just that there's a consistency of message that is coming through from Scotland, and this message is not being broadcast and shot out into the UK. It's being shot out from the media landscape. That's what we saw in the last couple of days as well. As soon as the SNP get to the microphone, the media just switches off.
Yeah, but I mean that's the power of the right-wing media, is that they are basically an extension of the Tory party, and the Tory party, you know, use the right-wing media to manipulate the train of thought of the electorate within Britain, and you know, it's always going to be like that. You know, I mean, you look at Russia, and it was always Pravda that was sort of like people sort of like, right, well, if it's in Pravda, then it must be true.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? I mean, surely you must have papers like that back in Germany.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think every place has them, but the lack of control over the UK media is a very specific one, and one that is kind of one-on-one taking over from the US. It's getting worse and worse in the UK. But we have something to help with that here, because we've put together some quotes from the European Union newspapers and media outlets. So let's have a look. Of course, the British government can ask for an extension to the Article 50 to, for now, circumvent the fatal date of the 29th of March. All European member states would have to agree. The question remains, though, why they should. If the United Kingdom has no idea what it wants and where it is going, what is it that Europe is supposed to do about it?
Yeah.
I mean, it's a very clear and damning analysis of what is going on, and I think this is what, in a way, what Brexit has brought to Scotland, and it has made obvious to the rest of Europe how stuck the lack of democracy has made this country, and why Scotland is seeking for alternatives as part of Europe, but as an equal member state and not as part of the UK.
Well, the other issue on that is the complete failure of the Tory government to actually recognise the cross-party that actually, the cross-party group that actually found this out. You know what I mean, through the court ruling.
Yes.
You know, the Tories desperately wanted to
not even think about it.
You know, just put it into the cupboard.
Completely. Shall we have a look at another quote?
Yeah.
So this is from a Belgian newspaper, The Standard. After the dramatic vote last night, there are only a few scenarios left, and even those seem to lead down the road of chaos and insecurity.
Yeah.
Okay.
You see, again, that you know, it's interesting that Europe are viewing this from obviously the outside in, and you know, even they can see how chaotic the whole episode is. You know, I mean, they only need to look at the fact that you know, basically Theresa May ran away for a month and just wasted time. You know what I mean? It was a bit like Manchester United in the dying minutes of the last FA Cup. You know, everybody was always talking about, you know, there's extra time and then there's Alex time. Do you know what I mean? And she basically bought herself time to avoid this, you know, so she's manufacturing an unhealthy atmosphere.
Completely, and she's used the time that we are now lacking as a country, being dragged out and falling over the cliff. All that time was used up by Theresa May covering up her own tracks.
Yeah, yeah.
It is kind of tragic, and it is. In what way this is responsible handling of an official office, and you know, you're the Prime Minister of a whole nation. We're all, I believe, rightly annoyed at Jeremy Corbyn for not taking the opportunity to use his role in opposition. But after all, she is the Prime Minister and has completely failed.
Interestingly, I would like to find out what the Belgians think about this whole seaborne fiasco.
I'm sure that all the maritime nations around Europe are spending a lot of time laughing and laughing at the minute.
You know, I mean, it's just so bizarre. You know, I mean, I don't get for a second that you know, they could contract a couple of ships from DFDS or P&O or something like that. You know, but how do you contract ships from a company that doesn't have any? Do you know what I mean? And I believe Ostend actually confirmed that they hadn't even paid anything towards, they hadn't even applied for a landing fee.
I know. And how do you get that job? Really? Is that how, you know, any applicant for any job application would not go into the interview saying, well, basically I don't have the education that you're looking for, nor any of the additional things that would help me carry out this role. All they have is a company that doesn't have any of the qualifications required to carry out the job that they've been asked to potentially do in case.
Yeah. But I mean, the other thing as well is the fact that the Tory party don't seem to care what the Europeans think of Britain. Do you know, because they're too busy pursuing this, trying to resurrect the phoenix from the ashes of this, glorious empire. The phrase that sticks in my craw is the precious union. I mean, precious to who?
Yeah.
Precious to you, maybe, but not precious to Scotland.
Yeah, absolutely.
Maybe not precious even to Ireland. I would, only a certain section of Ireland, but it's certainly not precious to anyone out with your own wee bubble.
Well, I think it's an interesting matter of definition. If something is precious to you, then it is because you're benefiting. The parts of the UK that don't feel that this is a precious union are the ones that have treasures removed from them, that have a lack of democracy. They are not benefiting from the preciousness of it because they're not the benefactors of it. Those that are the benefactors of having the increased resources of the wider geographic reach of the United Kingdom are the ones that are advocating for it.
Yeah, but the only people that are going to benefit from the precious union are the Tory fat cat donors that are pumping money into the Tory party. Yeah. So that, such as Theresa May's husband can benefit from ludicrous contracts that are just sort of like shuffled to one side of the desk. You've seen it again with Seaboard.
It's an interesting way of making deals in any case, and
You don't seem to see this being replicated in Europe.
Right, and all of us have to go and say, well, allegedly this is taking place, but I very distinctly remember seeing a mafia high up talking about the most corrupt country in the world, and he wasn't talking about Italy, and he wasn't talking about any other nation but the UK. So we all know that we're righteous, we have a cause, not out of overly suspicious minds, but because there is stuff going on. And I'm wondering if we should go to the next European quote.
Sure.
So this is from a newspaper, the Denik N in Slovakia, and they say, uncertainty remains, and that isn't changed by the extending the Article 50, no matter how omnipotent this appears in the short term. It is because no one actually knows what to do with such an extension. And I think this is a really good point to make. Extending Article 50 would mean that any extension that goes beyond May would cut into the European elections.
Correct, yes.
And on what basis the EU would want to do that, given that then the UK would kind of, we're still part of Europe. Article 50 being extended would mean we would continue to be part of Europe. We would be entitled to take part in European elections. Why would the EU want to have a country as toxic and misinformed on its way out, taking part in the European elections? And also these votes have already, the seats and votes have already been redistributed. Whom would the UK vote for? And for how long? Would we re-elect Alan Smith for another 6.5 weeks?
Well, you see, this is and it's something else as well that slightly has me at a quandary, because in one aspect, I think I said to you earlier on, is the fact that like anything, you have to be in it in order to change it. So therefore, from a completely selfish point of view, I would like the likes of Alan Smith to be in Brussels, because he's done a wonderful job of standing up for our country.
Absolutely.
You only need to look back at his legendary speech, which had the whole EU stand up, and give him a standing ovation and stuff like that. The EU are in no doubt as to Scotland's position and Scotland's view on Europe, and how we dearly wish to remain European Scottish, or Scottish Europeans. I mean, Scotland has, since time began, Scotland has viewed itself as internationalists. You only need to, you go anywhere in the globe. My uncle used to say to me that if you walk into any bar in any country, in any part of Europe or any part of the Western world, you will bump into another Scotsman.
Absolutely, and the Scots are migrants, which is why I feel there's a lot of migrant sympathy that comes from Scotland. Especially as a European, I can also say that the way that Scotland has struggled in 2014 to gain convincing support from within European nations has a lot to do with the whole nationalist title that we keep using and keep rebranding, and at this point that seems to become less relevant to the EU, because they are struggling with nationalism, and it's not the Scottish pretty brand of civic nationalism, but actually as a European, what I'm seeing, as a German I wouldn't call myself a nationalist, but what I'm seeing is that what we're fighting for is democracy. We're not fighting for a nation because we have a nation. We're fighting for democratic entitlement for the entire population of Scotland.
Which is entirely correct, yeah. But again, that always gets countered, especially by the British Unionists, is that they see nationalism, Scottish nationalism, as a threat. However, they see something of British nationalism as to be something to be proud of.
Well, they don't call it that, do they?
Well, no, they refer to it as, you know, being proud Unionists.
Yes, being patriots.
Being patriots, do you know what I mean? And it just sits slightly one-sided on my
Of course
shoulders.
it does, and I think all of us in Scotland who are setting our sights higher, we need to understand that this isn't about that discussion anymore, and we shouldn't be looking to the UK to solve this argument. Our goal needs to be being an equal partner in a family of nations. No matter whether we're part of the EU or not, our sights need to be set higher, and we don't need to argue with people who will not and deliberately will not understand where we're coming from.
Yeah, well, see, you know, it'll probably be tested later on in a couple of years. I was the trade union rep at Glasgow Airport, so down in the arrivals, before you go through when you're into passport control, you've got two separate lanes. You've got, as just now, you've got lanes for British and EU, and then you've got a lane for non-EU. And that again shows how divided the whole system is. You know, it's to sort of like separate people into different pens and stuff like that. Now, will it come down to that you're maybe going to have 3 lanes? Do you know what I mean? Where you're going to have non-EU and British, or are you just going to have EU and Scottish?
Well, it wouldn't surprise me, considering that within the context of the Union, native British people from anywhere else but Scotland and the parts that are inconvenient to the UK are first class citizens, and then there's Scotland and Ireland, and if Wales pipes up, they're also becoming second class citizens. Migrants definitely have become third class citizens, and I've noticed this over my time in Scotland. I've been here for well over a decade and have very clearly noticed suddenly I'm a migrant, but also I'm an unwelcome human being. I'm somebody who needs to be considered from a whole different point of view, not just my personal merits. That same thing, without the emotional judgment behind it, will apply when you separate yourself from your community, and that is what the EU was so far. The UK was an integral part of the EU. You are becoming something that is moving away from that unity. You're not part of the community anymore.
Well, I see that, as I said to you earlier, I'm due to go to France in 3 weeks' time with Eastwood Refugee Aid, and we try and do as many humanitarian missions as possible. The good people of East Renfrewshire and surrounding districts kindly donate and support us. We go over there to directly help the migrants that have been displaced out of their country, and who displaced them? The British. Do you know what I mean? You know, by default, it's the British government who have created this situation. Do you know, the striking thing, the very first time I went over there, and after I had been in the jungle as it was, there was another camp down in Dunkirk, and we went to visit that, and there's a mixture of Syrians and Eritreans, whatnot, what have you, and they all had their tents side by side, and I came across a Vietnamese family, and there was a visible gap between their tent and the Syrian, and the next tent, who could maybe have been Eritrean or something like that, I'm not too sure. but you know, because they were sort of like not in the club, although they were in the club of being a migrant, but they were not in the club of being Syrian or being Eritrean or being from Palestine or anywhere like that, and they were also separated.
Yes.
But what gets me is the fact that we are all human beings. Do you know what I mean? Do you know, and as we touched on earlier on when I was talking about Scotland being internationalists, you go to America, you know, where they celebrate, you know, St Andrew's Day, St Patrick's Day. You know, yet to see them celebrate St George's Day. Do you know? But again, on a total different scale, I was in Gdansk in Poland. They've got a Scottish quarter. I dare say there would be a Scottish quarter in every major city. France, probably one in Germany as well. But you know,
integration is part of it. Yes.
into whatever society.
Absolutely,
that we are.
and the same is true for EU migrants in Scotland.
Correct.
One of the things that we have noticed through different organisations that I'm affiliated with is that after Brexit, suddenly we realised there was a complete vacuum of EU citizen-related organisations that could carry out some sort of, you know, like, some sort of work that would help empower the community, because we're all very well integrated.
Well, again, all throughout this whole discussion on Brexit, the SNP have been consistent in saying devolve the powers of migration to Scotland, you know, because our demographic hasn't changed in about 100 years. Do you know, it's always been wavering between 4.5 and 5.5. Do you know, and we need migration to invigorate an already booming economy, which was pointed out that the Tory government don't like to hear it. But we welcome diversity. Do you know what I mean?
Absolutely. It doesn't just make humanitarian sense, it makes economic sense in every possible single way. And this is also an argument that hasn't really been made in the UK media. I mean, we know now that migrants, especially European migrants, contribute more economically than they ever take out of the system. But these arguments are not being made by people who have a lot to gain from not making them. Scotland has a lot to gain from making these arguments. I seen
a great tweet the other day there, and it was an Asian doctor, and this Scottish person went into the doctor's surgery and said, "I want to see a Scottish doctor," and she said, "Here." She's not Scottish. You know, she's Asian. Like, no, she's Scottish Asian.
Right.
Do you know what I mean? She's a Scottish doctor. She speaks Scottish. She has lived here all her life. She's worked in.
Right.
Do you know what I mean? What does that doctor not know that any other doctor? Do you know what I mean? And people's narrow-mindedness. It just leaves me flabbergasted time and time again. I go back to the fact that at the end of the day, whether you're like Scottish, whether you're German, whether you're Eritrean, whatever, we are all human.
Yes.
And this is this hostile environment that the Tory party have created. You know, where even you know, they are trying to highlight that. Basically, the UK is full, and we'll select who wants to come in. Where they fall down is the likes of people like Kirsten Hare, the MP for Aberdeenshire and stuff like that. Our father owns 6 farms, or you know, however many it is, and she's saying, "Oh, nobody's picking my vegetables, nobody's picking my fruit," you know. But I've sat down with Sajid Javid, and he said that, you know, he'll let 5,000 seasonal workers in.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, the entire. It doesn't even cover half of it, and we know it. But like this show is one of the main topics, and we can see that happening in Westminster. That the SNP and many other MPs have continuously spoken about EU citizen rights. It's obviously hugely encouraging for EU citizens like myself, but it shows that this is a breaking point. This is also something that will really pave the way for Scotland into the international scene. Let's go and move on to the next international quote. So this is from a Danish newspaper. Almost 3 years have passed without any positive impact. This is proof that even a democracy, one of the oldest in the world, is no guarantee that a referendum is handled in a safe and responsible manner. I think this is a very pertinent point to make. Referendi are there to understand and gauge the public interest.
Well,
but the way that it's been handled in this case is obviously, it's absolutely...
Again, it's been underhanded. You know, I mean, even the 2014 Scottish independence referendum was underhanded. You know, there are allegations of dark money. You know, money being shifted from Northern Ireland over to the West Coast here, actually, and there was an awful lot. I won't go too much into it, you know, because I don't want to end up in somebody's courtroom. But it's intrinsically linked to the Eastwood Tories. You know what I mean? There's a lot of skeletons in that.
I'm sure people can come and ask you about that in person.
They can.
That might be better and safer.
They can, yeah. But you know,
you're right.
It's a wide-known fact that an awful lot of I tend to call them poodles, right? The 13 Scottish poodles that were put up for the Tory party. They were bankrolled by this dishonest money.
Allegedly bankrolled, right?
Allegedly bankrolled by this dishonest money, and a couple of MSPs have got sort of like purple hands as well when it comes down to it, allegedly. But the overriding
we have to be careful no matter what referendum we're talking about, right?
Yeah,
we have another referendum to face in Scotland, and there will be many more occasions for this, but it's a system that is easily manipulated, and until the democracy that we are able to engage in is safeguarded against these kinds of things, we are always going to struggle with a level of integrity
but what I was going to go back to as well is it's not just indicative within Scotland, but also it's indicative with the right-wing parties in England. You know, I mean, I know for a fact that UKIP bankrolled quite an awful lot of the pro-Brexit demonstrations down in London. And there was money filtered down through from the Tories as well in order to, and I'm talking about
I understand
well-financed.
So how would you counter that? I think for me one of the really obvious things is that Scotland is very politically engaged now, but you don't have a deep, a long history of people having political education on the continent. To me that seems much higher. I think there's a way to be gone for the overall UK. Scotland has a much better chance of catching up on this, but education about how to treat information, how to question the statements that you're receiving both from the media and from politicians. All these kinds of things play into that, and maybe it is because of that that the UK suffers from the way that its democracy can be twisted, turned and taken out of context.
Yeah, well, you know, if I could possibly suggest in a completely partisan way of suggesting it, because we should point out that it's not just the SNP that are pro-independence in Scotland, you know, but the Greens as well need to play their part, and we need to be quicker to counter the take me to court lies that basically are told by the unionist parties. You know what I mean? And
it's not lies; it's just, you know, misstatements.
It's basically okay. It's I even believe that Mary Black get pulled up for actually saying that in a parliamentary question as well, and she was forced to say mistruths.
Yes.
And then she was corrected again on that.
Well, we all have to be careful about that sort of language.
Thingma wonderfully said, well, we just need to say that the honourable member was confused.
Right.
So if you want to say that we're up against confusing statements from the opposite side, we have to counter these confusing statements.
Absolutely.
And try and correct them. Because there's no point in countering them if you're not going to correct them. You know, so where they say everything's black and there's no shade of white, then obviously we have to show what that shade of white is. But it's...
Oh yes, and it's not about the simple arguments in the same way that it isn't about simple language. Complex matters require more consideration and integrity in how we approach it.
Yeah. You can't answer complex questions just off the hoof.
But you're right. It has to do with a non-partisan stance on this. If we see something that is wrong and hear something that is being misrepresented, we have to call it out and we have to make the more complex arguments. I think this is also something that again plays into the migration issue. How many times have we heard absolute, statements that were just not representative of the real facts?
Yeah. I mean, one of the going back to the migration issue, and this is what the right-wing media do, is that there was a case of there was a 22-year-old student who crossed over from France into England at the time that they were allowing under-16s. They were allowing a section of under-16s into Britain, and his face was put on the front page of the Sun or the Mirror or the Daily Mail, and his full beard and stuff like that, and he looked 22, and they're saying no way is he 16. Well, no, quite clearly he wasn't 16, but why don't you report as to why he was there? Yeah. He was there to chaperone the 16-year-old. He wasn't purporting to be a 16-year-old.
Yes.
Do you know what I mean? So what you have to do is then change that narrative.
Yes.
And try and sort of like draw out of them the real reason. Not just a shock headline. Do you know what I mean? Because
completely, it is about making more complex points.
Yes. It's shock headlines.
Well, and it's also something that Scotland, as a nation and as a community and society, needs to remember. We all love an easy soundbite. It's not just one party or another. We all need to raise our standards in order to not fall back onto those simple things. Let's try and have the last graphic from European media. This is from Poland. This illusion that the British head of state wanted to keep alive over the last 2.5 years is crashing down in a spectacular fashion. That it is possible at the same time to take advantage of the single market and at the same time benefit of the independence from Brussels in matters such as immigration policies. It is exactly that which we were talking about just there. It is trying to make arguments for Cloud Cuckoo Land and presenting and representing and pushing this message as if it is the truth.
Yeah.
And if we're honest, in the context of the UK, this works. It works for the people that are currently in power. They have the upper hand. If we're going to do something different in Scotland, we're going to have to be a lot more self-controlled and better at voicing messages, not just by sound bites, but by giving both sides of the argument. And it's possible. It is perfectly possible. We know that our MPs down in London have made a pretty good job of having integrity. I'm also thinking of, was it David Lammy that held this fantastic speech the other week?
Yeah. I mean, I'm not, there are people such as David Lammy and there are a few others in the Labour Party, not many, but there are a few still quite principled politicians. And I also pointed out to you even Anna Soubry, who again has been the only consistent Tory MP who has, constantly said You know, we need to put it back to the people. We need to let them decide, and all the rest of it. So it isn't just it isn't a case of us and them. You know, we can never, obviously, we can never let ourselves go down to that level.
No.
Where you know, I mean, I met a chap the other night there when I was out for a social drink, and he came out and and said to me right away, you know, I'm a Tory voter, and we had a great conversation. And it's good to engage with people of a different viewpoint. You know what I mean? And then you can see both sides of the argument. You know, if you're constantly sitting in a bubble and stuff like that and talking to people who, you know, constantly agree with you, then, you know, you're never going to be able to form a correct resolution. And unfortunately, that's what the Tory party are doing. You know, up until tonight, you know, when Theresa May said that, you know, she's willing to meet people and stuff like that, and what I've actually taken note of here is the fact that she's doing it on a singular basis.
Now she's interested.
now she's interested to one-on-one discussions with Ian Blackford, with Jeremy Corbyn. You know,
it kind of follows the divide and rule pattern again. You're not trying to get everybody in the same room, you're trying to go and see people individually. It was kind of the same approach that Trump has to Europe at this point. You know, we're not considering Europe as a nation, a unity nation of states. No, we're only interested in engaging with individual nations. Obviously, that goes directly against how this whole system works and why people come together as a union.
Yeah. But again, you know, and it's worthwhile for what you pointed out there to being 100% correct is that she is doing that for a reason.
Yes.
Right? She's doing that for a reason because on a one-to-one meeting, then it is an enclosed space and it is a controlled environment. Do you know what I mean? Now Ian could come out of that meeting and he could say, well, you know, we discussed this, that and the next thing and all the rest of it, and then she could come out of that meeting and say, well, I don't know what meeting he was at because we didn't discuss that. Do you know what I mean? And it's that my word against yours. Right. You know, now as a trade unionist, when you enter into discussions, you've always got somebody to represent you, someone you know who you're making your case to, and you've got someone taking notes. Do you know what I mean? And then there is no ambiguity. Do you know? And what you're saying is absolutely correct. To have everyone in the room at the one time and hear everybody's voice in a clear, concise, coherent way. Sort of like, you know, right? Okay, Ian said that, and Caroline said that, and Jeremy said that. And write it all down and stuff like that, and then look at it.
Trying to avoid any sort of progressive and you know, any processes with integrity that are making it possible for democracy to be carried out in the light and not in the dark. These kinds of things are trying to be removed, and we get that that's the modus operandi, at least of the current UK government. It's obviously not a winning strategy. Because at that point, we've seen in the last 2 years that even the House of Lords, a deeply undemocratic sort of institution, has voted against the ongoing crisis in government and has made it possible at several points to stop this going on.
Yeah, but then,
so we're about to...
It leads me just slightly off tangent as the fact that neither David Cameron, and this is why David Cameron decided to pass the hot potato over to Theresa May, is that he didn't want to be seen as the Prime Minister that broke up the Union. And neither does Theresa May. She doesn't want to be, you know, the...
Nobody wants to hold that hot potato, understandably. But like,
of course they don't, but unfortunately that hot potato has been in the microwave for way too long.
But a lovely...
And it's like, you know, it's
understandable.
It's just going to blow up.
So we're about to wrap up here. I'm wondering whether we should, on the hot potato issue of Theresa May's Prime Ministership, I'm wondering whether you could come and visit us at www.broadcastingscotland.scot. You can also support us here with an ongoing £5 donation or any money that you've got to give so that we can keep bringing you friendly, honest discussions on the topics that are relevant to Scotland. Until then, I hope you have a good night and it's been a nice time.